So Paul Weiss, investment funds groups, AI. So you're at this sort of nexus of private equity funds, different types of asset managers, trying to figure out, and the law firm, tier one law firm, trying to figure out what does AI mean, what does technology mean for how we're operating, all of that type of stuff.
Exactly. So how are we using AI internally? How are we using AI with our clients, and kind of working with our clients to use AI or technology?
So how did you get there? What's your life journey?
Yeah, so I started off my career in-house at a private equity fund. I was there for roughly 10 years. I was doing M&A, I was doing private funds work, kind of all of the various things that come up when you're in-house. I went to a private credit fund for about 2 years. And while I was there, I did an MBA, realized I didn't really want to practice anymore. So I went to a legal tech company, worked on a variety of things there, industry strategy. I helped build one of their products and, kind of was an industry expert. And then got a call from Paul Weiss about this kind of new role in their investment funds group and moved over. So really
And you've been there for how many years now?
I've been at Paul Weiss for going on 2 years.
Going on 2 years.
Yep.
Got it. And with the legal tech company you were at, was that Entra?
It was, yeah.
Okay, cool. And so that was huge amount of growth.
Yeah.
Over 4 to 5 years.
Yep.
And that was kind of like a V1 AI legal company before LLMs and everything
exactly
came out. So you've seen
kind of
the full
seen
curve.
It from, yep.
And so what are the major trend lines you're seeing right now, and how GPs are trying to think about AI in their operations, law firms that are working with these GPs, what are the big trend lines that you're
I think
specifically,
as it relates to kind of the private funds, investment funds, fundraising space, we're seeing a lot of interest in sort of what can our law firms do for us in terms of making processes more efficient, speeding up the time to get certain things done. But we're also seeing a lot of interest within the GPs in adopting AI and technology solutions, either to help their legal teams or their business teams or operational teams. And it's really, there's a lot of noise out there. There's a lot of different things in the market. And so really what we're trying to do is, make the best decisions with the information we have and help our clients, do the same thing.
And, when we see so GPs come to us and they say, we have these problems, right? Inbound KYC, we're getting crushed. We're just getting so many KYC requests. Charts, we're getting crushed. Investment structures and stuff like that, we're getting crushed in charts. Do you have AI for this, right? Because when you Google or they hear about Athennian, and we do charts and KYC, and then they want AI, and oftentimes we see a lot of confusion in these GPs. There's so many products out there. How do they sequence which product to purchase? Purchase. How do we think about, managing all these stakeholders internally, stuff like that, competing demands? Because you take something, for example, charts, charts for who? Tax for charts, tax for IR, the LPs are always asking for charts, right? Charts for compliance, charts for M&A, there's a lot of dimensions to charts.
Yeah.
And so, but what we observe is, how the private equity has sort of evolved over the years is there's been a significant amount of outsourcing.
Yeah.
Of to professional advisors, right? So law firms, fund admins, accounting firms, and so on. And one of the things, how that impacts, our observation, how that impacting the GP's ability to be able to evolve into this world of AI and evolve their operations is they oftentimes don't have control over their own data. The data, or they don't even have centralized, for example, in our world, the entity data around, the fund structures, the investment structures, all the co-invests, the SPVs, and so on. They don't have all the data in one place. So, our first question to them when they say, we want AI for KYC, we want AI for charts or something like that. Our first question is, well, where's your data? Right. Do you have all your data in one place that you can put in the AI? And the answer is usually that they don't,
right?
And that it's it's sitting with Walkers and Maples and Cayman, and it's sitting with Citco in Luxembourg, and it's sitting with, and then it's sort of everywhere but nowhere. And, that sort of, we got to get all the data together in one place is this like massive effort that has to go in to be able to like unlock any of this stuff. And how, like, I'm just curious kind of how you're seeing like this sort of, and I remember this isn't a term that I came up with, but this concept of like IA before AI, information architecture before AI, right?
Yeah.
How, like, are you seeing those types of patterns within, GP clients that you're working with, and how, what's the sort of consensus on that?
Yeah, I think we see that a lot, and I think I think GP data lives, like you said, kind of in a lot of different systems. It can live with a variety of law firms. It also, lives within pockets of deal teams. And so, one of the things I used to deal with, 15 years ago was taking all of this and creating an actual printed book so that we would have this at our fingertips. Like, thankfully, we've evolved from that. But, in order to really make the best use, I think, of any technology, you really have to be thinking about, okay, how am I going to gather and pull all of these sources together? And sometimes that project like really needs to happen before you start implementing technology or using AI on top of it. And sometimes you can use technology and AI to help with that, organization. But, that's just a fundamental piece because, garbage in, kind of garbage out is what you see if you don't kind of get your house in order.
Do you think a lot of teams are buying technology too quickly, like before they've really thought through what's the operating model that we want to have with this technology and how it fits in?
Yeah, I think in some cases, I think sometimes, people are very excited about the prospect of being able to do all this analysis and all this work on, data and information that they have. And AI is like a really great tool for that. But then you start to kind of dig and say, well, do you even are these things organized in any kind of central repository? Do you have access to data that you're giving to your fund admin? What? And as you start to unpack that, it's like, well, let's try to solve that problem first before you kind of.
And then permissions.
Exactly.
Who has permission?
Exactly.
Like this whole concept of like, AI is going to eat all software. Like my response is like the permission matrix would like to have a conversation with the AI.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so AI in legal, huge amount of funding.
Yeah.
Like extraordinary amounts of funding. I'm curious, like, how are you seeing like just the, that amount of capital can drive certain, behaviors in the market and patterns in the market? Like, what are you seeing in the market? You imagine you're somebody at Paul Weiss, tier one firm that is involved in like making decisions about what technology we're going to use and talking to clients. Like, what are some patterns you're seeing in the market given that amount of funding?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting because I think on the one hand, one of the really positive things that's come out of it is that there are a lot of, vertical solutions that are now getting funding that are investment funds focused that really help with a core workflow for, fundraising or for managing your PE fund or dealing with your portfolio companies or doing deals. And those types of, like, it's really encouraging to see more going in there. You've got,
It's
people,
like vertical solutions.
Yeah, you have people with like really deep industry expertise or legal expertise, or they have like a really strong team around them building solutions as partners with clients or with law firms that really kind of solve problems that we've all been kind of trying to solve for a long time. And then I think you see, these other players that really have a lot of funding. It's a little unclear what problem they're solving. And it looks a little bit more like they're just trying to get a revenue share from the law firm and from clients by sitting in the middle of that relationship. And that's really tricky to navigate for us at this point.
Okay, so there's been a huge amount of funding into legal.
Yeah.
I think it's like after like cybersecurity, like second most funded by VC's market right now. Enormous valuations. You're in a role where you're making, participating in making the decisions, important making the decisions and what tools Paul Weiss uses, talking to clients about what tools they're using. So you're kind of in that sort of commercial process with a lot of these, companies and platforms out there. What are some patterns that you're seeing? How is this, amount of capital changed how technology vendors are behaving in the market? I'm curious. Like,
I mean, overall, I think the interest in the market and the funding coming into legal tech is fantastic. I think there's a lot of processes that are, really ready to be innovated and thought about. But I think the other kind of really encouraging thing is seeing a lot of these verticalized solutions getting funding and getting recognition that may be solving a very niche or specific problem. They're solving a specific workflow for, the fundraising process in private equity, or they are helping you organize how you think about your portfolio companies. But these things that really are specialized to a particular industry or a particular process. And I think that's great because it really is something, in a lot of cases, these allow us as a law firm to provide more value to clients, do something more efficiently, have a great kind of collaborative way to get something done. And we're really working with people on the other end of this that are industry experts. They have the legal expertise. They've done this work, and they're really they're really being thoughtful about how do we improve this for everyone involved. And then I think on the other side, you sort of see some companies emerging that are kind of looking at, okay, there's all this legal spend, there's all of this kind of money being generated by the private equity industry. How do we sort of get in the middle of that and, participate in it? And in some cases, the value that they're bringing as a technology solution, may not be there. And it's a little bit kind of tricky to try to sort of suss out who is going to really want to work with you as a partner, what is going to be a value add to your client relationships over time, and what is sort of creating like a chaos in those relationships, really.
Right. So you sort of have vertical solutions where you had a domain, expert in some workflow, right? So you had like a fund formation attorney had an opinion about how, subdocs or, KYC for onboarding or something like that should be improved, built a solution for that. And you have a very opinionated piece of product with like opinionated design and so on. And it's really easy to understand where that slots in.
Yeah.
Right. And it's easy to understand the economics of it and so on.
Yeah.
and then so that's sort of one category of product. Then you have these horizontal solutions that are AI for everything legal. But it sounds like a lot of the work falls back onto the client and onto the law firm to figure out, well, okay, how do we make what do we build with this thing? And then the design effort falls on you guys, it sounds like.
Yeah, a lot of the time.
Of how do we do this?
Yeah.
Which is a lot, I think historically, we have like Athenian's an entity management solution. We have certain opinions about how certain workflows happen, and a customer can buy into that or not buy into it.
Right.
But in either event, we've made the design decisions, we've put in the design work, we support those designs and so on.
And you're taking a lot of input from your customers and from law firm users and other people who are using the software.
You end up benchmarking the market.
Exactly.
This is, of all the ways this could happen, on it, when we kind of think about what's the best way and what's the most successful way, what's the sort of Rubik's Cube on that, this is it.
Right.
Right. And you kind of refine that over time with the customers that you have, right? And the partners that you have. Interesting. And so you have these horizontal solutions. I mean, the amount of capital is just incredible. And so these sort of horizontal solutions, and they are, trying to, kind of figure out how they can be in between a law firm and their clients. The reality is, to fill these valuations, that they probably need they need both sides of the equation. They need everything, right? And so, and I think the other thing too, that the entire AI market is massively subsidized with VC dollars. And we've seen this before, you've seen this, and this is something, this is a playbook of that, VCs have, right? It's called, attract and extract. Right. And so that was Uber. Uber was massively subsidized by investor dollars for years and years and years. And now, I took a cab last night from, Newark to Manhattan was $200. Right. And, that was, I remember and gas has gone up and stuff, but 3 years ago, that was $40. Yeah. I have to imagine that and I've heard stories. I mean, we're not a buyer of legal AI. But I've heard from our customers that very, aggressive pricing going on in the market. And I have to imagine that there's going to be huge price hikes at some point.
I think you're right. I think, the players that stay around are going to have to think about their business model, and it's probably going to cost us more in the end.
Yeah. No, absolutely. So what's you have all this AI coming in. It's going to, and I think that we're in this moment where, we're in this sort of probably towards sort of the tail end of this euphoric bubble of AI. I saw a headline yesterday that OpenAI is, going around promising 17.5% guaranteed returns to private equity funds to subscribe to its funding rounds. So I'm thinking we're probably at the tail end of this euphoric bubble. And you have all these headlines, SaaS is dead and, all this type of stuff, SaaS apocalypse, all these massive generalities with no nuance. But there will be an impact to everything. This is, I think this is ATM machines. It's like LegalZoom, Web, 1.0, Web 2.0, all that type of stuff. And then there will be an impact to every industry. There'll be an impact to, software companies. There'll be an impact to professional services companies. What do you think, if you're going to kind of look in the crystal ball, 2030, what is the law firm today look like in 2030 with all of this, AI?
Yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of pressure on particularly kind of the junior and mid-level classes to really become very technologically savvy and to be really comfortable working in any kind of AI tools and in technology tools. Because I think really what's going to happen is a lot of these more routine or kind of manual processes that are part of a fundraiser or part of our practicing law in general are going to be faster and easier to accomplish if you know how to use technology to do it. But I think what happens when you start making fundraising faster is the barriers to entry are a little bit lower, and frankly things get more complex, and that's really where you need true experts from these law firms to be able to help you along on the fundraise. So I think what happens, I think there's going to be a period of time where this is going to look scary, but I think what happens is ultimately you have lawyers who are armed with a great technology assistant, can do more quickly, and that just means that there's more deals getting done, more funds being raised. I don't really think that there's any chance that the kind of overall industry, private equity industry, slows down because they now have AI. But I do think that it's going to become kind of a determinant of whether you can compete, right? So can you use, as a GP, can you use your own data efficiently? Can you compete in processes? Can you bring operational value to the portfolio companies that you're, investing in using AI? So really across the board, I think it's just going to sort of accelerate the pace of business, but it'll be really interesting to see.
Yeah, I think that one of the sort of first principles of free markets that I believe in is as the cost of transaction costs come down, the volume of transactions goes up.
Yeah, I think that's right.
This has happened before with, ATM machines and bank tellers, right?
Yeah.
That's happened before. Everybody thought that bank tellers were going to go extinct because, people can get their money out with ATM machines, and that's not what happened. Both went up. And, what ends up happening is just the hurdle rate increases. Humans just move up the value train and do more valuable work, right? And I think a really good, analogy is e-discovery software. Lawyers used to manually sift through documents and charge by the hour for that. And then e-discovery came around and they didn't do that. And I have to imagine, I was never involved in litigation, but just first principles thinking, I have to imagine that as the cost of litigation comes down, the volume of litigation probably went up. Because people get more litigious because it's not so expensive to sue people anymore, right? And so, you can see as the cost of for example, fund formation comes down, do you start seeing more micro funds and boutique funds, and you have, how does the market change and adapt to that. Right?
Yeah. And you start to see more flexible and like innovative structures being used, and new, as we have kind of new pools of capital coming into the industry as well. And we're adjusting and trying to figure out sort of how to accommodate that. I think, lawyers, private equity professionals are very creative people.
Yeah.
And I think with the time that they are saving, not kind of doing manual things, we will just see more of that creativity coming out, and the complexity of these transactions, fundraisers will just increase basically. I mean, that's sort of where I see all of this going. Well, I guess from your vantage point, what do you see, what has looked different in GP behavior, customer behavior over the last couple of years? Like, what are you seeing GPs come to you focused on, and how are you sort of addressing that?
3 to 4 years ago, GPs were coming to us, and the use case that they had was, we need to get all of our entity data in one place. Right. And we had a lot of GPs and big GPs that didn't even know what entities they had. Yeah. And we heard crazy stories. Like we heard, like the legal team would say to us, how we learn very frequently, not all the time, but frequently, that like a deal team has done a new co-invest deal is we get the invoice from Maples. Yeah. That like new vehicles have been created, and then we're scrambling to get FATCA filings done and various SEC filings done.
Truly one of the biggest pain points for me in-house.
When you were in-house.
So I believe it.
Yeah. So that it was very much like around centralization, and there's still that. But what we've seen is those firms 3 to 4 years ago that were, and some of them did that on our platform, some of them did it, just in SharePoint. Yeah. Like it's more about the creating the motions and the muscle and the pipelines and the alignment within your teams and your vendors, just to start, not learning about entities being formed via invoices, right? Like, creating systems for that. And so, we know that trend line is still happening, but now what we've seen is firms that have done that work, they have it centralized, and now what they're doing is they're starting to really unlock the value of that. Right. And so we're doing, and what we're seeing is more data strategies. Mm-hmm. So, we'll do, we have integrations into the data lakes of fund admins, right? And so we're pulling data out. We have integrations into, fund accounting tools like, eFront, InvestTran, Backstop, stuff like that, to be pulling out, fund ownership and, that type of stuff. And what we see on the private equity side, that driving a lot of automation around charts, around KYC, around compliance, stuff like that. When you actually map out like what needs to happen when a new SPV gets formed, there's when you actually map out all the steps, it's like 20 or 30 steps. Yeah. Right. And, across tax and fund accounting and all this type of stuff. If it's, treasury stuff and all kinds of stuff. So when you actually start mapping it out and want to scale this, and I think what's interesting when you go to the traditional model of just throwing bodies at this it's not working for a variety of reasons. One, LPs are pushing back. They don't want to be eating such big invoices as a fund expense anymore. And you have this whole concept of operational alpha, where you're really trying to we have two levers on IRR, right? The one is the performance of our assets. The other one is the fund expenses. Right. And so you see when returns were easier to get than they are now, nobody really cared about the fund expenses. But now that it's harder to get, and so we're seeing a lot of focus on that, and how can we? And we've seen some crazy stuff. We've eliminated a $3 million invoice between a major fund admin and a major GP, just re-entering entity and related entity data between their internal entity management system and a GP's internal entity management system. And so I think there's this recognition that they can't scale with bodies anymore, and they're all trying to figure out, how to scale with technology and how to scale with data. And what we're seeing, what's really interesting, the entities are very much like a context layer for AI. It's sort of a bit of the scaffolding of you want to run all these corporate actions, you want to move money through a structure, you want to run compliance through a structure, whatever you want to do.
But you have to have the structure.
You have to have the structure, and you have to know who needs to approve these actions, which is something I've been thinking a lot, just as how do I not get run over by SaaS apocalypse? And what we're hearing from our customers is that the entity structure, what are the entities, how are they connected to each other, and who can approve actions? Like what's the signing authority? Which sounds simple, but it's hard. So that's in the context layer is really, we're seeing a lot of interest in that, and a lot of upgrading from legacy systems or upgrading from Whitespace to Athenian to be able to unlock AI, because you get all the data in one place, you get the context layer so these agents can run.
I imagine this is only getting more, the problem is only getting larger as, you see folks holding on to portfolio companies a bit longer because they haven't been able to find great exits, or now rolling into a continuation vehicle, or doing other kinds of secondary market transactions. And, I think the fund structure and complexity to accommodate new investor types, you have like rated note feeders for insurance investors, all that. Like, I imagine that the problem is only getting larger. Yeah. So even as people are getting a handle on legacy information, like everything is just getting more complex. Is that, are you seeing that?
Yeah, 100%. So what we see is a lot of pressure. So like, GPs are trying to unlock new sources of capital, right? So retail, wealth management, others, and those markets have different expectations on the liquidity of both information and capital. Right. So you have, these semi-liquid funds, these evergreen funds, all this type of stuff. And, if you're, a GP, you have to go to a bank that can distribute this to, wealth, through their wealth management channels. They don't want 90-day marks. They want 30-day marks, right? And they want, they don't want annual, redemption. They want quarterly redemption and stuff like that. But a lot of the infrastructure, when the traditional GP was, like institutional capital, like endowments, and, sovereign and stuff like that. They had different expectations on the liquidity of cash and information. Yeah. Right. But retail and wealth have much tighter expectations. And I think where the market's going, I think if you ask any GP, in theory they love the idea of I can buy the market can buy units in my infrastructure fund on my iPhone and like in Robinhood. Like that's the idea, because that's an infinity market. But how do you get there?
The reality
and
of the complexity of the
of how you get there. Right. When you have, the information is being copied and pasted between spreadsheets in Luxembourg. Like that's really hard to get there. And so, that's where we're seeing a lot of demand on our software and, on, all kinds of other products in the market. Right. And so, I think kind of have this, like with AI, I think going back to AI, someone made an interesting observation or like an interesting comment, which I thought was really cool, where if you the analogy is like the life cycle of like oil, and we figured out how to like drill for oil. And that's very hard. Like, a lot of engineering into that. And now we sort of have this like raw commodity of oil, which is like the AI compute. But now we need to build all the downstream, like the refineries, to actually like integrate that and make the oil useful into markets. Do you know what I mean? And you got to figure out, how do we refine this for gasoline? How do we refine it for diesel? How do we refine it for like, there's all these things, right? And like, this is like, if you've ever seen that, like all the tubes and stuff in an oil refinery, like it's incredibly complicated. And I think that's the stage we're at now, which like, okay, we now have this
looking at a series of complicated tubes.
Like now we have this new commodity and like, we're like, look, if we light it on fire, it like creates heat and like, this is great. But like, how do we now sort of connect it into markets and make it useful? Now this is like this really hard process to do that. And I think, we figured out how to drill for oil, and now there's oil gushing out of the ground everywhere and everybody's excited. But now here's this like super hard work of building all these like, proverbial refineries to like make it useful and get it, and like, distribution, like gas, Anyways, that's like this I was
mental model try to jam this into your oil analogy, but I can't quite make it work. But I would say one of the things that I do think is an interesting thing is everybody's sort of coming to us and saying, can you do X, Y, Z with AI? And, they have a problem, and there's a problem to be solved. And a lot of what we're doing is working with them and saying, okay, let's pull apart this problem a little bit. And let's think about which parts of this problem are, problems that can be solved with AI, and which parts are, process problems or
technology, just general technology problems, data organizational problems, and really trying to kind of piece all of those things together, because I think there's such enthusiasm oh, well, AI should be able to do this and AI should be able to do that. And, at some point, maybe it will be able to do everything. But right now it's a tool in the toolkit as you're trying to solve a problem for a client.
The amount of inbound demand we get that we tell them, you're not ready to buy software, is higher than it's ever been.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is it's a hard conversation to have with our sales team, because they want to sell software.
So what do you do in those cases?
So, we get a lot of that demand, and they have grand, kind of what I was talking about before, grand ideas about what AI can do, but they just don't have the appropriate, they haven't done the work of what's our current operating model and what's our target operating model? How do we want to work? Agnostic of the tools.
Right.
What's what's the A to B on that? And we say to them, you're not ready to buy software.
Yeah.
Which, they're usually shocked when we tell them that, because they expect us to want to sell them software.
Right.
And so what we usually do is we work with a lot of consultants. So we work with Alpha Alternatives, which is a consulting firm that focuses just on the alts market. They do technology, business process consulting, stuff like that. We work with Deloitte, work with PwC, work with Elevate Services. We work with some smaller consultants as well. And we typically say to them, you guys need to do two things. You need to document your current operating model, and you need to design your target operating model. Right. And you need a referee for that.
Yeah.
Because if you need an impartial third party, because there's too many politics. You guys have day jobs. And so we do a lot of referral and bringing a lot of consultants into those processes, and that's been really successful. So that's what we do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the things that we are often doing both internally and with clients is really trying to diagnose, is this what is the business impact of the problem that you're trying to solve? And also, what is the outcome that you're really looking for? Not just to use AI to do X, right? That's not the outcome. That can't really be the thing you're driving to. And so it's looking at it and saying, okay, is this not being done fast enough? Is this too expensive? Is this, creating complexity in the way that you're working right now, and you're trying to, be more organized and efficient and kind of track data better? And sometimes all of those things, right? But kind of sitting down and really going, okay, what are the problems that you're trying to solve, and how can we bring technology in any form to bear on those problems, is a big part of what I think is really interesting about the role that I'm in. Because I think there's a temptation to just throw technology solutions or AI at everything. And a lot of the time, what you really have to do is sit back and sort of look at the business impact and design a business strategy for solving the problem,
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Well, Caitlin, it's been fantastic having you here.
It's been a pleasure.
Awesome.
Thank you.